Good morning, everyone. I will now call the Select Committee on Biotechnology's informational hearing to order. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. Welcome to my colleagues. We're joined on the dais today by Assemblymember Bill Quirk, Assemblymember Paul Fong, Assemblymember Rich Gordon, and Assemblymember Brian Mainshine. My name is Kevin Mullen. I represent Assembly District 22 in San Mateo County. I am honored to chair the Select Committee on Biotechnology. My hometown, South San Francisco, is the birthplace of biotechnology. I have seen California become the leader and premier location for the innovation economy. 2014 will be a busy year for this Select Committee. This year we will be having hearings across the state to highlight biotech clusters. The International Bio Conference will be in San Diego this year, and I look forward to seeing a large California presence at that convention. Members of the Select Committee and I have signed a letter urging Governor Brown to attend this year's conference, and we are working closely with his office to make sure that goal becomes a reality. Today's hearing will be the start of a formal dialogue among industry leaders and other stakeholders, educators and policymakers to better understand the issues and challenges confronting biotechnology in California. Some of the issues we'll touch on in this and future hearings include education, the workforce pipeline, manufacturing, tax policy, and privacy. It is my hope that these discussions will lay the foundation to a greater understanding toward creating sound policies that help the innovation economy flourish here in California, with biotechnology at its core. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues and fellow committee members to see if they would like to make any opening remarks, and I see that we are joined by Assemblywoman Diane Harkey as well. Thank you very much, Assemblywoman, for being here. Do my colleagues have any questions or comments?
Well, thank you very much. This is my 6th year on the Select Committee for Biotechnology, and this is one of the pleasant, enjoyable committees that I serve on, because the biotechnology community is such a great industry, a great innovative industry in the state, and they provide so much for us. They save so many lives in more ways than just the physical lives that you save. You save the economic lives of our constituents as well. And so it's an honor for me to serve on this committee, and I look forward to continuing on this dialogue with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblywoman Harkey.
It's my 6th year as well, and I've attended these seminars all over the state or committee hearings, and so I am very, very pleased to be here as well. I just wanted to point out to members that I happened to have been in the Central Valley yesterday at the Ag Expo, the World Ag Expo. I guess it's huge amounts of acres. I don't know. It's 100 acres or whatever. It's just huge amounts of acres. And I just wanted to tell you that everything that's out there, the technology, the unbelievable resource management, anti-stress for plants, subterranean irrigation to keep roots from rotting and to ensure that the soil doesn't have issues. I've just in all the biodredging, waste, Prime Dirt, which is a company, biodredging, waste management, soil fertility, odor control, compost, bioremediation. I mean, the show, the expo, is filled not only with huge mechanisms and machines that are so efficient that, I mean, it's amazing. They use laser-guided controls to ensure that the earth is level or has only a 3-inch slope between 1,200 feet, such that it's water conservation. And I just want to point out, I think that this industry affects so much in our state. I've got Orange, San Diego counties I've served, and it's huge in our county. So, and the potential is huge. And so I really am excited to be here. I'm excited with what's gone on. The only thing they really need right now is water. And I want very much to work on that with our staff and our people here. But it's just it's fabulous. The technology and the ability to keep to try to keep some of this here in California is what I'm striving for. We need to have the manufacturing here, and we need to create a better quality of life or a less expensive quality of life such that we can attract people to stay here and actually produce. And I think we can do that. We have the technology, we have the workshops, we have the venture capital, we've got everything going, and I'm just really look forward to those of you who will be in this legislature for 12 years or potentially 12 years to be able to stay on this continuum to ensure that we actually get some things done that lower the cost of living of California and provide a better quality of life, which this industry is doing. So thank you very much for the hearing, and I can't wait to hear from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman. And we have 3 panels today. We're aiming for under 30 minutes for each and hoping to get everybody out of here by about noon. So we'll be efficient as we move forward. I would like to begin the discussion by introducing the first panel on the status of research and development in California. Dr. Judith Kjellstrom is director of the Biotechnology program at UC Davis. She is here to discuss the connection between investment and human capital and how that translates into financial capital and therefore economic growth in the state. Dr. Susan Baxter is the executive director of the Program for Education and Research in Biotechnology for the CSU system, and she is here to explain the role public funding has on K-12 education and higher education and what impact budget cuts have inflicted on the cultivation of young researchers. And I want to thank you both, our distinguished panelists, for being here. And Dr. Kjellstrom, we're going to start with you if we can.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Yes, it's a pleasure to be here this morning, and thank you for the Select Committee on Biotechnology of holding this, because we are facing some issues at our universities, and we really need to share this good news and bad news. And did you get my remarks in your binders? I have a complete PowerPoint with graphs, and also a publication that we put out a couple of years ago to talk about some innovative educational programs. So I just went to the CHI event a couple of weeks ago, and the California Healthcare Industries Report for 2014 had a wonderful quote to say, to a large degree, California's immensely successful biomedical industry is built on academic discovery science. Outstanding predoctoral and postdoctoral training programs supply talented scientists to transform basic discoveries into novel drugs, devices, and diagnostics. But in recent years, government support for basic research has become increasingly constrained. NIH funding, which has been stagnant for more than a decade, has taken a further hit from sequestration, which has cut research grants by 5%. While it's good news that California is getting a larger percentage of this grant revenue, the total pie is getting smaller. And I have a graph in your binder that shows this continual decline of the NIH budget. Now, we know that the UC campuses are powerhouse for research and development. And we're going to have to do something to maintain this preeminent situation with this shrinking budget. Because if you really look at this declining budget, NIH purchasing power has been cut by almost 25% compared to a decade ago. The success rate for NIH grant application is less than 20%. NIH-funded SBIR and STTR grants have been also more difficult to obtain, and the success rate is approximately 10%. And these are for grants for the spin-out companies that we're trying to do at our UC campuses. Also, in the face of reduced venture capital funding of early-stage companies, this situation impacts the translation of university research to the marketplace. If you look at the graph of funding in other countries compared to the U.S., we see that Singapore, Korea, Germany, China are increasing their R&D budgets, where Canada and the United States has been on a decline. So this really threatens the long-term health of the U.S. and California economies. And as you all know, higher education remains one of the best investments that the federal and state government can make. I want to specifically talk about the effects that we're seeing at the universities. If you really look at this unpredictable funding stream, it's really affecting our researchers' ability to support graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. This would be salaries and supplies, buying new equipment, travel to conferences. We're seeing that early stage researchers are struggling to find funding. The average age for acquiring an NIH R01 research grant is 42, which is nearly a decade after many academics begin their careers. This has an effect on their publication record, building a strong laboratory, and obtaining tenure. High-risk innovative research is the driving force behind the success of our biomedical and biotechnology industry, so these issues have a long-term effect on the business community. I have testimonies from faculty and recent graduates and pre-doctoral students in your binder, and I'm going to summarize some of their comments. One of our distinguished professors is having a reduction in personnel in her research lab. She can only take half the postdocs and pre-docs into her lab, which slows down the innovation. PhD students are finding it difficult to find a lab or fellowships. PhD students are also having to be teaching assistants every quarter, which slows down their time to graduation, because if they don't get their research done, they don't get a PhD in science or engineering. And then entrepreneurial researchers are, again, struggling to find their funding for those early stage startups. So our suggested action items are threefold. Number one, we need innovative programs to provide seed funding for early stage research and startups to drive innovation. About 3 suggestions would be redesign the UC Discovery grants to be funded more through state or industry funding, so that we can fund research that is too high risk to be able to even apply for an NIH grant. We need those early stage projects. Continuation or growth of tax credits or incentives for industry to help do this. And then create innovation ecosystems through public-private partnerships. One example are bioincubators for these fledgling companies that are coming out of our universities. It's, again, we call it the Valley of the Death, or Valley of Death, that they come up with something really good, but they can't get that early stage funding. The venture capital community is not interested. Secondarily, promote educational programs that link academia to the biotechnology and life science industries to better prepare that highly skilled workforce. Number 1 on my list is industrial internships and co-ops. These are a critical component, and oftentimes they really do need to be paid if we're talking about a PhD level internship, because they do have to pay their bills. And so this is something that we have done in the past, but we need to expand it. We do need more graduate fellowships, which could be funded through the state or industry, so that these students are being able to do their research even in the wake of having their PI not have an R01 grant. So again, if they have their own funding, they could still do their research. Now, I do have some examples of very successful programs here at the University of California, Davis. The program that I've run is the Designated Emphasis in Biotechnology program. We've been doing this for 20 years, and we have over 260 PhD students from 30 different disciplines. All of these students must take a 3 to 6 month internship. And I'm struggling to find enough industry partners to provide places for those students. So again, we have the students that want to do this. Sometimes, though, we don't have enough industry partners. We have a new partnership with UCSF that's funded by the Moore Foundation called SETI, Career Exploration Through Internships, that's going to expand this effort beyond just the biotechnology arena. And then we just got a grant, one of the NIH Director's Best Awards of broadening the experiences for PhD students in the biomedical arena. And so UCSF and UC Davis were 2 of the 10 that were funded in September, and I'll be the director of the biotechnology industry component of this. So we are expanding these things, but we do need more industry input to really make this happen. The last thing that we're doing at UC Davis, which I think is really pro-industry, is the advanced degree program for corporate employees. That's how you retain an excellent employee that has a bachelor's degree, and you can see they have potential, but they have a mortgage and they don't want to just quit their job and go get their PhD. So we have a mechanism to get a PhD at UC Davis in engineering and life sciences, and they don't quit their job. They do their wet lab research back at their home company. So then they can get a PhD from UC Davis and then be promoted within their organization. So we think that's that other side of the coin to help the industry. The third area that I want to point out is support of K through 14 STEM education. We have to keep this pipeline fluid, because if we don't encourage our young people to take science in junior high school and high school, we don't see them at the university. So one of the efforts that we've done at UC Davis is our Teen Biotech Challenge to get 9th through 12th graders to be inspired by biotechnology. And we have most of our sponsorship coming from industry and private donors, because I certainly don't have any money, but we give away our time. So anyway, through that program, we've encouraged the School of Medicine and the School of Veterinary Medicine to take some of the winners into their research laboratories. And these are paid experiences, 8 weeks. And it's amazing what we see out of the Institute of Regenerative Cures. 8 weeks, a 9th grader can learn how to grow stem cells, and they present a poster. And we can reach down and get these children inspired to do wonderful things, to have research experience before they even start the university. And we're really targeting some of our at-risk high school students in the Sacramento Valley, the ones that probably would not go to college. So again, it's a deep commitment into our communities. We love the high school biotech academies, and I think Sheldon High School in Elk Grove is a prime example of one that we love. It's a 4-year academy, and we work with them on the advisory committee to get e-mentorships. We bring the children over to the campus to give them the university experience. And so it's this real mentorship and nurturing and showing them there's a life outside of poverty. And I would say most of these young people at least go to community college when they finish this academy. But they learn how to do the basic PCR and electrophoresis. They could go into an industry setting for a co-op during the summer if we really could find companies that would take a 16-year-old. I think that's usually we have a problem of getting someone into an industry lab if they're under 18. So it's something we can look at. We also, UC Davis supports this new CRANE, Capital Region Academies for the Next Economy efforts here in this valley. So again, this partnership with everyone coming to the table from the university down to our schools. And the last area that I really want to encourage funding is in our community college biotechnology academies. Solano Community College has a wonderful biomanufacturing 2-year degree. Jim DeClos gets every one of his students placed, and that's that AS degree that's very, very narrow in its focus of biomanufacturing. And again, they need to be able to expand. They're at maximum capacity right now. So these are just some of the ideas that I've seen over the years. I've been doing this for close to 20 years, so I'm not some new kid on the block. And we want to keep this ecosystem going from our junior high, high school, all the way down to the PhD level. So I just encourage us all to work together to maintain our leadership in the biomedical innovation and help our companies stay in California. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kjellstrom. A very comprehensive rundown of what's out there, especially via UC Davis. And, one of the challenges, I think, when it comes to biotech is the impression that it is only clustered around coastal areas and only really is accessible via the workforce for PhDs and so forth. That's just not the case. It's a general employer, and we want all geographic areas to benefit from the prosperity that can be created via this industry and all segments of society, demographic and otherwise. And I appreciate you delineating some of those programs that exist for us. Dr. Kjellstrom, I think what we'll do is hear from Dr. Baxter, if we can, and then we'll circle back for questions for both of you if we can. So, Dr. Baxter, I want to make sure I introduce you properly. Dr. Susan Baxter is the Executive Director of the Program for Education and Research in Biotechnology for the CSU, and she's going to talk a little bit about K-12 education and higher ed, and also what some of the budget cuts have brought to this arena. So, Dr. Baxter, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. The program that I run is a system-wide program, so all 23 campuses are involved. We support over 900 students and faculty, about 675 students a year through our program. So just to give you a scale of all the regions of California that I look into as well. And I think, as we've already mentioned, it's important, I think, to always remember that this ecosystem does stretch from K through 12 through the PhD, and so I'm happy to be here to represent that. I often quote that greater than 80% of the life sciences workforce is actually made up of professionals at the master's degree or lower. And it's that 80%, the bachelor's and master's students, that the CSU particularly focuses on, of course. So in answer to the question, what can the state do to improve STEM education, I'm going to skip over K through 12 and talk about the universities, to ensure a sufficient pipeline of individuals qualified to work in research areas, it will probably come as no surprise that I recommend the Assembly continue to do what it can to increase California's investment in public higher education. We know that improvements in STEM, and I'm not going to define the acronym yet again, but requires a student-centered curriculum and hands-on learning opportunities like Judy's been talking about. To graduate workforce-ready biotech professionals, we must offer students opportunities to do science and to be engineers as early in their academic careers as possible. This focus requires ongoing infrastructure investments, from buildings and facilities and labs to faculty and equipment. As you heard Chancellor White talk a couple weeks ago in the State of the CSU address, the CSU recognizes the need to increase the investment in high-impact practices designed to engage and retain STEM students across the higher education spectrum. He proposed investing in new faculty hires to bring cutting-edge technologies and expertise into the CSU, and scholarship to the students to work with them in the labs and doing scholarship. And we're especially keenly focused on closing the achievement gap that persists for students and groups underrepresented in the biomedical and biotechnology-related disciplines, and thus the workforce as a whole across California. So what does an effective STEM education look like if we're doing it right? The Business Higher Education Forum, the BHEF, issued a really thoughtful report last year in response to the national call for greater number of STEM graduates. The BEHF recommends investing in evidence-based high-impact practices shown to better engage and retain STEM students. And in my package, I have a slide showing what all those high-impact practices might be. I'm going to primarily focus on undergraduate research in my comments today. But the high-impact practices range from student-centered active learning formats instead of lectures, stage on the stage. It focuses on summer bridge programs and immersive undergraduate research experiences. These are the opportunities that we hope to scaffold or strand through the 4 years of a college experience for the students that come through the CSU. So based on 18 years of data from the system-wide California University Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, that's a National Science Foundation funded program that's been in across the state, uses an array of these high-impact practices and has been doing so for almost 20 years. And we know from their data that they can absolutely close those pernicious achievement gaps between underrepresented students and others. So we know these systems work within our own demographics and with our own university systems. The program I am involved with is a 26-year-old program, C-Superb as we call it. We also have a history of supporting undergraduate research experiences, and looking back over the reports over the last couple years, over 91% of the students that we support go on to graduate and continue on in research careers. So these are high impact practices, these research experiences that we can offer to our students. And I should also note that 91%, if you're familiar with the graduation rates, I do have a slide in there that shows the overall graduation rates to be, unfortunately, about 30% nationwide and statewide in STEM disciplines. So it's an issue that we're giving a lot of attention to. So the CSU's cobbled together support from for undergraduate research with grants and support from the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and private research founders like the Doris A. Howell Foundation for Women's Health Research. So why are all these people so concerned with undergraduate research experiences? We know that by working with faculty in the classroom and on problems, we know the students will build that solid foundation for a life sciences career. We also know, and this is important, when I go out and ask industry, what is your #1 workforce need? The first thing they'll say is a research experience. From a biotechnology industry perspective, undergraduate research experiences are the most in-demand and high-impact practice that we can provide for the workforce development. We also know that students interested in STEM fields as freshmen, when they enter the campuses, do switch out or drop out of STEM disciplines in the first 2 years. Bayer Corporation, a global life sciences company with significant operations here in California, has issued reports focusing attention on the need to improve the introductory STEM curriculum, those first 2 years of classes. In addition to funding from the National Science Foundation, the CSU has been fortunate to find strategic support from private foundations like the Keck Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation, aimed at improving the first and second year experience for STEM students on our campuses. Grants and strategic partnerships allow the CSU to be resilient and remain innovative and maintain our momentum, especially during state budget crises like we've experienced in these last few years. For example, one of the new grants we've just won is for Volunteers to Service in America, VISTA programs. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they place students in situations where they can have an impact on building critical mass or critical capabilities. And we won a grant from the VISTA Foundation to place volunteers in campus settings so that they can help coordinate internships and off-campus service learning opportunities for STEM students in those first 2 years of college, so they can get these community-partnered experiences or industry experiences or experiences on our campuses in academic settings. These interns will be placed and will be able to help us build these private-public partnerships around a campus or around a college to help enrich these out-of-classroom experiences, if you will. Last week, I attended the California STEM Summit and learned about networks established and emerging. They're wonderful, wonderful examples. If you get on the website there, and they have a lot of the PowerPoints already posted from last week, you'll see that there are already ecosystems and regions, between community colleges, campuses, UC and CSU, school districts, and public funders, and WIBs, workforce investment boards, and other chambers of commerce forming around improving STEM education. I heard how the Central Coast STEM Collaborative, especially, is a brand new organization building bridges between Dignity Health, Santa Lucia Regional Occupational Program, Allen Hancock Community College, and the Cal Poly San Luis Obispo Biomedical Engineering Program. And they're really banding together in response to the next generation science standards, which are going to ask that more engineering design practice be introduced in the K-12 curriculum. So having the engineers at the college level talk to the K-12 instructors is going to be an important connection to make in the coming years across California. And so we hope the VISTA grant will help us build these kind of networks and nodes. I also had some testimony about, I was asked about what are these incentives for private industry to invest in research and development. And I think I've talked mostly about investing in the STEM workforce, the future STEM workforce, by investing in internships and first and second year experiences on and off campus. But I wanted to skip ahead and talk a little bit about CSUPERB's system-wide idea to product early stage biotechnology commercialization challenge. We found willing corporate sponsors at Amgen and Gilead this year for this competition. It pairs business students and science students, undergraduate and MBA students, to work on early stage entrepreneurial ideas in the life sciences. Sac State teams actually have won the challenge all last 3 years with the help from SARTA and the regional biomedical industry organization here in the area. But bioengineering and business faculty have built an amazing constellation of industry experts through these connections, and our corporate and private sponsors see these as strategic investments as well. So not only later, I think you'll hear about investments in pre-competitive and pro-competitive alliances for research, but also even that workforce for entrepreneurship is something that our corporate sponsors are very interested in. So we cannot separate the goals of building and sustaining California's biotechnology industry from the need to also educate and train professionals at all degree levels, the next generation of the biotechnology professional workforce. Further, as a recent Kaufman Foundation paper points out, the public sector can affect few significant factors to encourage entrepreneurship, except for investments in high school and higher education. I hope you can commit again to increasing the strategic investment in California's public education systems, and I thank you for the attention. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baxter. On that last point, you've been very clear on and emphasizing the first 2 years, the switch out issue for folks in STEM, and the Vista grant sounds like an exciting opportunity, but it sounds like we need more of a systemic approach, not a kind of a one-off funded by a grant to deal with that issue. But just looking at K-12, where in that timeline should we be focusing our efforts to get the best outcomes eventually with our students? And we hate to have to pick and choose. We need that support all the way through that process until these folks matriculate and enter that workforce pipeline. But if we have to make those tough choices on K-12, where do we target efforts?
Well, I'm going to lean back on a lot of the reports and the things I heard at the California STEM Summit last week, but the Bayer reports are very clear about investing in the first 2 years of college, but also in teacher prep. And I think that teacher prep, getting teachers into the classrooms, K through 12, who have deep science experience. We have programs with some of the national labs, actually, in the state of California, where we send our teachers who are in training to go actually do research. Yet again, here we're talking about research, getting to the lab and being a scientist or being an engineer for a summer at national labs. And that kind of program, I think, is really important to expand those kind of opportunities for the teachers who are up and coming.
I would like to add on to that. For years, we partnered with Sac State and the local community colleges to offer 1 week intensive training down at UC Davis for high school and community college science instructors to make sure that they get the aha also about what's genomics and personalized medicine, so that they can take that back to their classroom. And that's how we piggyback having those teachers excited, and then they get their students entering the Teen Biotech Challenge, which is for them, and then they can actually experience that for themselves. So sometimes informal learning, like science centers that's outside of the classroom, can sometimes give the child the aha experience too. So I think we have to work as a community. But I would contend that if we don't reach these young people by the 6th grade, they don't take the science track in junior high school. So they're kind of cut out of the whole pipeline. So according to the National Science Foundation years ago, they said if a child doesn't get the aha experience for science and engineering by really the end of the 5th grade, they enter the valley of death of going the non-science route. And so, so again, going 10th grade, 11th grade, we've already lost them way years ago.
I'd like Thank you for that answer. I want to acknowledge that we have Assembly Members Wykowski and Wilk also joining us today. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And I believe Assemblyman Wykowski has a question.
So that goes to my question is, it was wonderful testimony about first 2 years of college and how industry wants to get people prepared. I'm with an 8th grade science teacher who actually is started a job this year working for the district on implementing Common Core and national science standards. So as a 8th grade science teacher, she dedicated 20 years in the classroom to trying to get women or girls to stay into the science track. And it's her, many discussions over the dinner table, but it's her belief, as you intimated in the close of your statement, that the 5th and the 6th grade level, I mean, it's great you're a freshman in community college and you're going to get into some program, but we've lost them at the beginning. So my question for CSU and for Davis is, what are you doing? Because the challenge is that many of these elementary school teachers have no science background. So what are you guys doing to get active learning students into the elementary schools, into the 4th and 5th and 6th grade level, so that the junior high school teachers have a snowball's chance of trying to keep them on the track, because they don't check out at 5th grade and say, I'm not doing science. So I know that you prepared for the college level and all the good things that are going on in those programs, but what's happening in academia at the 4, 5, and 6th grade level? Because you have to give these teachers a packet because they were theology. And they're good people. I mean, they're teachers and they're trying to do the best they can. But for the training that you guys have just presented to me, they need help.
Well, we have all these PhD students, 260 of them, and part of my challenge to them is to do public service. And so I can speak personally, some of our students will go over to an elementary school in Davis or in Sacramento and volunteer some of their time in the classroom. Again, that's kind of informal.
I'm wondering if there's any system, because I mean, all these biotech companies are coming to you guys and saying, we want training, and maybe the conversation should be, why don't you get some of your folks and we'll get some of our students and develop a packet where you send in Einstein or whomever it would be.
These things are happening in grant-funded settings and regional settings already. In the San Diego area, there's a thing called the Life Sciences Summer Institute, which brings high school students, pairs of students, to come and spend a summer in the community college biotechnology programs that we've already alluded to. And then they go into industry labs as well and get a tour and some perspective of the workforce development needs. So there are informal, again, programs like that, but systematically within the CSU, I think teacher prep is increasingly trying to also recruit some of the students from the chemistry department to become teachers, students who have had research experience that will then go on to teach in the K through 12 system. So I think that recruiting students who have a depth of content knowledge in the sciences into the K through 12 teaching profession is a very big emphasis to try to do that as well.
I just see that as a whole. I mean, I know part of, as an assembly member, I know that we ask for money and give us more money here, and I just see that as a whole, that that if we're talking about 8th grade, girls, trying to get them, and if they don't have an active learning science teacher and they're just somebody teaching from the book, they're dead. Gone. They'll never get into the sciences.
We totally agree with you. Again, but there's only limited time, and we looked at that K through 6 versus middle school and high school, and we have such a limited staff from our point of view that really the only place we could really have an impact is in middle school and high school. But so again, we have an issue all the way down into our K through 6, but I don't think our School of Education, I think, is approaching this somewhat. But again, there's been a slash in funding on all of these programs that used to be focused on K through 6 maybe 10 years ago. But that's something that we'd like to keep bringing up, is that there's a dire need for that.
But I would also say systematically, the Long Beach experience, I don't know if you're familiar with that in Long Beach there was a compact between the CSU Long Beach and the campuses, I'm sorry, and the campuses in that district. And that's been a partnership that's been going on for, I believe it's almost 20 years old as well now. And that involves the colleges of engineering, the colleges of education, and the College of Science at Long Beach State. And they are already and have been proactively working on the next generation science standards and how they will do teacher training in both the new ones that we're producing, but also doing workshops and in-service learning and faculty development for the teachers that are already in the classrooms. And so these systems and networks that are built up regionally are perfectly suited to help make these adjustments to the and put more active learning into the K through 12, and what you're talking about is K through 8 setting, and I think that's really a focus. And the next generation science standards are pushing that conversation.
Thank you, Chairman Mullen.
Doctors Baxter and Shellstrom, thank you very much for being with us today. I'm sorry, Assemblywoman Harkey.
I'm sorry, and I'll take either or, but I believe it was Dr. Kellstrom that said that the STEM dropout rate was so high the first 2 years, very high. Why is that? Is that because the students coming in don't have the disciplines necessary in math and science that they can, or is it because their classes are impacted, they can't get them?
I think you made that point.
Yeah, I made that point. There are many, many reasons. There was a report that came out just 2 weeks ago in Science Magazine talking about the switch-out rate of STEM disciplines being fairly high. So 50% probably drop out or switch. Well, I'm sorry, I should say switch to another kind of major. And it turned out that it wasn't actually very different than an English major. That it maybe isn't as bad as we've all been saying, that English majors start out and then they switch to finance, bless their hearts, or in something else, right? So the first 2 years of college, people change their minds. But we do also know that the way introductory science courses are taught generally are very large lecture settings. Those are some of the most off-putting ways of teaching 8th grade all the way to higher education, and we can show that if we switch those to active learning formats in the first and second year, the retention rates go up remarkably. We can retain about 80%. And there are other reasons. You mentioned remediation and things like that and preparation, but we know that active learning in formats in the large introductory classes can mitigate almost all of those other underprepared kind of excuses that you might put up.
I'd like to add on to that. At UC Davis, we encourage undergraduate research opportunities. So if a student that came out of a biotech academy, they can actually enter a research lab in their freshman year. And I think if you would look at the data, those students stay in their major because, again, they're getting the hands-on training and the aha of research. So.
Having been a victim of the large class, 350 doing stats and calculus even.
I used to teach 600.
I mean, you know, it's like, how do you do this? But I will tell you that I think maybe this might be a real opportunity for us to integrate with the community college system because they do have they have more hands-on. And if you're having trouble in a class, a community college is just a fabulous place to go to get a class from 350, 250 down to maybe 40, you know, maybe even less, depending on the discipline. I know Mira Costa works really strongly with UCSD. I also know that Biocom down in San Diego is working really strongly with the Boys and Girls Club. And is that life science
Yes.
summer?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So
other programs as well.
those things are out there. I am very, very concerned with the K through 3 so that they have the fundamental skills to be able to explore in the 5th, 6th grade, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, because I think, you know, the basic math comprehension and reading ability, if kids can do that at an early age, you don't lose them, the world opens up to them. They can get involved in anything. So
The science centers in communities. I'm trying to help with the Powerhouse Science Center in Sacramento. If we have this informal science where the whole family goes and they get the aha outside of the classroom, that's a very good adjunct to whatever deficiencies may be in your school. So I think
didn't get the aha till I was 23 and realized I absolutely loved mathematics and I loved science. Unfortunately, I didn't stay there, but I will tell you that it's fascinating if you can get a really good instructor that takes you beyond. I mean, I was doing physics and mesmerized
You
with
can
it.
always go back.
Well, I have.
college.
And I took calculus after nothing since 14. I mean, I did it, and
No,
that's
I
what I'm
see that,
telling you.
yeah.
But I was determined at my age to do it. I think it's very difficult to get people in because I was, I had good fundamental skills, but I did have that gap. And I'm really excited about some that's going on, but I really want to work on that. Thank you.
We agree.
Thank you both
Thank you.
very much for your presentation. We're moving on to our next panel. This is the marketplace, and I will ask, in the interest of time, for our panelists, if I can graciously request that you truncate your presentations. I want to make sure we have enough time for dialogue. I want to introduce Darius Lakdawalla and Karen Coates. Mr. Lakdawalla is an associate professor in the USC Sol Price School of Public Policy and director of research at the USC Schaeffer Center for Health Policy and Economics. His research has been concerned with the economics of risk to health and the organization of healthcare markets. His work has been published in leading journals of economics, medicine, and health policy. Ms. Coates is the Senior Regional Business Director of Pfizer Oncology. She graduated with honors from the University of Virginia with a degree in political science. In 2005, she assumed her current role as a Senior Regional Business Director in Pfizer's Oncology Business Unit. In her current role, she has launched 4 new oncology medicines in the last 6 years. We're happy both of you could be with us today, and whenever you're ready, Mr. Lakdawalla.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm excited to speak about these important issues to the Select Committee. What I wanted to focus on today are what are the policies that have really led to California taking the lead, really, in the biotechnology marketplace. And in particular, when you think about the range of policies that can affect the marketplace, they come in several flavors. There, of course, are policies like, of course, taxation, regulation, education, as we heard in the previous panel, and as well as health policies that affect the use of new medical technologies. But if you really think about the biotech industry and think about the policies that uniquely affect it and uniquely drive innovation in that area, most of the evidence suggests that there are 2 sets of policies that matter the most. One is higher education, which links back somewhat to the earlier panel, and I won't belabor the point too much there. The second is health policies that promote the use of new medicines and healthcare technologies. In terms of higher education, the only thing I'll say, just to flesh out some of the earlier panel, is that California's lead in higher education is quite remarkable, and most of the evidence suggests is the reason why biotech flourished here. For example, California has more universities in the worldwide top 100 than any other foreign country, let alone any other state. And most people believe that lead has led to California's ability to spin out new firms, whether through new discoveries as well as train skilled research workforce. So continuing the state's lead in higher education appears to be one important policy goal. The second one, which I think is distinct from the earlier discussion, focuses on how do we create a market in which there is a greater benefit to discovering new healthcare technology. So how do we stimulate the discovery of new technology, and how do we stimulate the development of firms that are going to do that? And there, I think, there are a couple of points worth noting. If you think about why investments actually occur in medical technology, it's actually not all that mysterious. Investors invest and firms invest when they expect their new discoveries to be used. And so the extent to which healthcare payers and reimbursement authorities are willing and able to pay for new medicines plays a large role in driving innovation and new discovery. For example, a number of studies suggest that increases in the size of the healthcare marketplace and increases in revenues that accrue to new healthcare technologies lead to the discovery and introduction of new drugs and technologies at a reasonably fast pace. Now, this, of course, is not just a California issue, it's a global issue, because whether a new medicine is discovered in South San Francisco or in Switzerland, it's going to be used by patients all over the world. So we're here to talk about the Californian perspective, but we have to be cognizant of the global marketplace in which California is operating. And there, we also have to think about how the benefits of companies in California spill out all across the globe. And a good example of this in biotechnology is cancer. Cancer is a disease area that in which medications are particularly reliant on biotechnology. And if you look at a study that we did at USC showed that over a 20-year period, American cancer patients enjoyed about a 3.5-year increase in their life expectancy. Europeans also enjoyed an increase in their life expectancy of about 2.5 years, and this was largely attributable to the discovery and use of new medications to treat cancer. And continuing that progress and sustaining the benefits to patients in U.S., Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa, all over the world really, depends on constructing policies in which new medications and new healthcare technologies are accessible and affordable and utilized by patients. And that creates an incentive to discover these kinds of new technologies. So indeed, the question becomes, I think, is kind of a first-order policy question. Are these new medications, we know that they're very expensive to discover, and that's why it's difficult to stimulate investment. Are they worth it? That's, I think, a first-order question for all of us who are health economists and particularly interested in health policy. Keeping with the cancer example, just for instance, we did a study that looked at, for instance, gains in survival for patients with cancer in the United States and Europe. And it turns out, and as you may know, in the United States, new technologies come to market faster and they're used more rapidly than they are in Europe. Many people criticize that as overuse of technology in the United States. And it is true that spending on cancer has grown faster in the U.S. than it has in Europe over the past several decades. But it's also notable that survival has also increased faster in the United States than in Europe. And in fact, when you balance these two competing issues, Americans have gotten more than what they've paid in terms of survival gains. If you think about the value of all the years of life that have accrued to Americans living with cancer, and you balance that against the extra spending that Americans have laid out, it's worth an extra almost $500 billion to American patients versus European patients, which suggests that making sure new technologies get into the hands of people who can use them and are appropriately reimbursed in the marketplace is a critical issue for ensuring both continuing innovation and also benefits to patients. Now, the problem, though, is that if we have a setting in which the prices of new medications are high, and so kind of the rate of return on investment is high, the problem is that may mean patients don't get access to those technologies. So it appears to be a bit of a catch-22. On the one hand, you want to make sure that patients can afford to buy these technologies, but if you make these technologies too cheap, in a sense, you're discouraging their discovery. But within health policy, we have a unique opportunity to solve that problem through health insurance. And the nice thing about health insurance is that it really creates two different sets of prices for healthcare technology. There's the price that is paid to, let's say, the drug discoverer or the hospital or the provider, and then there's the price paid by the patient out of pocket. And those two prices obviously are very different. We did a study at USC that showed that subsidies for prescription drug insurance play an enormously valuable role in two things. One, making sure that patients have access to drugs at reasonable and affordable out-of-pocket costs. And second of all, stimulating the use of these technologies and thus resulting in new drug discoveries. For instance, we showed that if you were to subsidize prescription drug insurance that lowered the out-of-pocket cost of drugs by about 20%, you would generate trillions of dollars of value to current and future generations of patients. Now, bringing this down to our context today, which is, again, this is a global issue, but we're here talking about what California can do in this global marketplace, and I think that becomes the next question. I think there are a couple of points worth considering. The first is that California actually, in spite of the fact that it's one state in an entire global marketplace, is actually a pretty important player. The United States, for example, is about half the global market for pharmaceuticals. California is about roughly an eighth of the U.S. economy. So if you think about that, just 16 Californias would be as big as the entire planet's marketplace for medicines, which is not an insignificant role that California plays. So that means the policies that are adopted in California for ensuring access to prescription drug insurance and health insurance and other health policies that stimulate the use of technology play a considerable role in the global marketplace. The other issue here is that California can become a leader in the way that it's beginning to roll out competitive health insurance exchanges and in the way that it subsidizes health insurance for less advantaged Californians. Already, there are more Californians enrolled in our state health insurance exchanges than there are people in any other state. Last I checked, there are about 500,000 people in covered California. And California also has influence over what are the insurance policy designs that are considered or allowed in covered California. So ensuring that access to new technology and new medications and new biotechnologies, ensuring that the insurance policies in covered California cover them and make them affordable is also another lever that we have to pull in ensuring that new discoveries continue and patient health continues to improve over the coming decades. Well, thanks a lot for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I know my colleagues have some questions for you, but we'd like to hear from Ms. Coates first, if we can.
Certainly, thank you. My name is Karen Coates, and I represent the western region of our Pfizer Oncology Business Unit. I'm Senior Regional Business Director, and I am based here out of California, have been for the last 20 years. So it's really a privilege to be here on behalf of industry to speak to you all about a topic that I was asked to address, which is specifically pharmaceutical pricing and how prices are set in the pharmaceutical industry. And I think we've heard a lot about the importance of research and the importance of biopharmaceutical innovation to the state economy. And it's almost impossible, I think, to talk about continuing to make those types of investments in research without addressing what is something of a hot button topic, pharmaceutical pricing in our industry. But there's definitely a connection between those two topics. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity to be here with all of you to hopefully shed a little light on that complex topic of pharmaceutical pricing. When I go out in the field every day with our representatives who interact with healthcare providers, and I see firsthand how important it is that patients who have the devastating diseases that these medicines treat, such as cancer, can get access to these medicines. And so I also see the progress that we've been able to make. And I think all of you are aware that in the last 20 years, we've made significant progress in treating some very devastating diseases like cancer. But there's still a lot of work to be done, undoubtedly. And everybody who's been speaking today has been very, I think is very invested in making sure that we continue to make the types of investments in basic research and in clinical development that will enable us to continue to make progress in treating some of these devastating diseases. My team focuses specifically on cancer, but what I'll be speaking to this morning really applies across a whole range of disease states. The science is at the heart of what we do in the biopharmaceutical industry. We have to follow where the science takes us. and unraveling the complex biology of a disease like cancer is an extremely time-consuming and painstaking process. The basic science work that companies like Pfizer do, in conjunction or in the context of also public-private partnerships that we've heard about today, is critical to being able to unravel some of the complexities of the science and being able to target the disease in a way that minimizes the impact on healthy cells in the body, but also is able to generate the efficacy that we're looking for to bring drugs to market. I think probably many members of this committee are aware of the inherently risky and expensive nature of pharmaceutical research, particularly in areas like cancer. But the reality is that a single compound can take 8 to 10 years to develop and discover at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. And the success rate, unfortunately, is not as high as we would like. Realistically, about 2 out of every 10 compounds that even make it out of the lab into studies in humans end up getting approval from the FDA, meeting the thresholds for efficacy and safety that are required to get regulatory approval. And interestingly, of those few medicines that make it to market, only about 20% of those actually end up returning the investment, if you will, that's been made in the research and development process. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor for both the riskiness of biopharmaceutical research and also the expense involved, frankly, that that drives future innovation and discovery. And the reason I say all of that by background is because that expensive process is a big factor in the determinant of pharmaceutical pricing. In addition to the expense and complexity of research, other factors that are looked at are the nature of the medicine and the benefit that it offers to patients, both in terms of efficacy, safety profile, convenience of dosing in relation to other competitors that are in the marketplace currently, the number of patients that can be treated with the disease, and as has been mentioned just previously, the policies and expected access to the medicine once it does get to the market, because the investors that invest in private research, such as that's done by Pfizer, expect a return on their investment, and so we have to take into account the expected reimbursement for the product and the size of the market that ultimately will be able to benefit from the product. I think the other thing that's important to consider when talking about pharmaceutical pricing, in addition to research and development, is that the work that biopharmaceutical companies have to do doesn't end upon drug approval. There's extensive post-marketing oversight and monitoring that has to occur to ensure that the long-term safety and efficacy data for the product is studied. We partner with regulatory officials in this country and other countries to make sure that that information is made transparently available to the public. And there's significant cost involved in that, and it's also it requires employment of resources, colleagues that are engaged in this monitoring activity, both in California and obviously elsewhere throughout the country. I think the other piece of it, and the piece of the business that frankly I represent, is the commercial side of the business, where when we bring a new product to market, we have to be able to provide detailed information to clinicians about the clinical profile of the drug, the safety profile of the drug, adverse event management, particularly in a disease state like cancer, where the toxicities associated with most of these medications are considerable. And being able to effectively manage the side effects is often the difference between whether a patient can continue a course of therapy that could have meaningful benefit for them clinically, or whether they discontinue and therefore derive little or no benefit. So educating clinicians on adverse event management realistically is a big part of what my team does out there in terms of interacting with healthcare professionals. So in summary, again, it's a real privilege to be here on behalf of industry addressing this committee, because I think there's so much work to be done in the innovative sciences, and California, as we've heard, is really leading the way in this area, and Pfizer's proud of the public-private partnerships that we're currently engaged in the Bay Area and in La Jolla, and many of those are detailed in the paper in your binders, but there's a lot of work still to be done. And in order to be able to continue that innovative work, we do need to be able to price our products at a level that permits us to recoup the investment that's been made in research and development, and to deliver, realistically, a return to the shareholders that continue to invest in our company. But again, I thank you for your time here today, and I'll take any questions.
Very much. Thank you both for your presentation. I know Assemblymember Mainshine has a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. From a big picture standpoint, I think that this, and why I'm so happy to be a part of this committee, this field of biotechnology is uniquely Californian. I mean, it did originate here. We're fortunate to have so many great biotech companies here. My concern is obviously is keeping them here, and then secondly, what can be done to help them expand, because they create a very significant percentage of jobs, and the jobs are very good, and they do run the gamut. Mm-hmm. They do run the gamut of income level, education level that can fill these jobs. Mr. Mullen and I have a friendly argument as to whose district is kind of the hub. But my point there is...
We're in both places, so we're neutral on that one.
We'll take it outside.
Yeah.
And my point there is we need to be concerned on this committee as to how we can make sure that all those companies can continue to create new jobs, stay here, create new jobs. I want those jobs created in San Diego. I want Mr. Mullen to continue to be second in the state in job creation. No, I'm kidding. But
where's the mute button again?
So it was mentioned earlier about taxation and regulation, how California compares to other states. I think that's something we need to explore. But specifically, one of the things that you said, sir, is developing a drug worth it. And I'm taking that in terms of, you're asking that in terms of from an investor standpoint. So the investor, of course, is looking at it from a rate of return, what the return is going to be. And yes, is there the byproduct of this presents a societal benefit, although that's great, and that could be a reason why they go into this area to fund it. But ultimately, they're going to look at what the rate of return is. So part of that is what impediments are being put in the way that could be removed, that are somewhat artificial impediments to increasing the level of investment. We know that the time and the cost are so significant to bring a technology to market. And we also know the success rate is very low. So what can be done in those areas to kind of compress the cost of bringing a drug from conception, an idea from a guy thinking about it and creating a test tube to bringing it to market? What are some suggestions that you all have that could help in that area?
Address it at a macro level, and I can address
why don't
it.
you start?
Okay. Well, I think a multifaceted, question, obviously, but within Pfizer and I think other large biopharma companies, some of the things that we're trying to do to improve the efficiency, if you will, of our R&D processes. Some of those are technology advancements, high throughput screening, for example, of compounds in the laboratory. Also, public-private partnerships play a big role in that equation. 10, 15 years ago, I think a lot of research in the pharmaceutical industry was done in silos. Academia was doing research, private industry was doing research, and you've seen in the last 5 to 10 years a proliferation of those partnerships. In the case of Pfizer, working with many academic centers throughout the state of California to share information and hopefully move the process along of research more efficiently. And I think that's a big part of the strategy to improve the outputs, if you will. But as you noted, research is inherently a risky proposition because a compound that looks promising in the lab, once it's put to test in humans, often has unexpected side effects and or lesser efficacy than what was projected. And the tie back to the topic that I was asked to address around pricing is that I think often the misunderstanding is that we price a drug based on the development of that particular compound and the development costs associated. And in reality, in order to deliver a return to shareholders, we have to price a drug based on the cost of doing the 8 other studies that unfortunately didn't lead to the results that we were hoping. But definitely the industry is, I think, very focused on trying to improve efficiencies. And even partnerships with other private manufacturers. Pfizer and Merck recently entered into a partnership around cancer research in an effort to speed the drug discovery process, eliminate inefficiencies in the system.
You know, I think I agree with all of that. I think from a macro perspective, one of the things that's a little troubling, to be honest, is that a number of large companies, not Pfizer, but a number of large pharmaceutical companies are beginning to scale back their R&D staff and or relocate them overseas. Interestingly, you don't see that among the small biotech firms, and I think one of the important reasons is that there's just a natural collaboration, a natural gain to being around leading universities, other knowledge workers, and that kind of incentives for firms to cluster in whoever's district together and be kind of close to each other. It's true that we live in the information age, but human contact still seems to matter in these kinds of scientific enterprises. So allowing firms to cluster together or encouraging them to cluster together, I think, is a way to combat this tendency to offshore to lower cost countries.
And I agree with that. I think that is a reason why, if you look at kind of a hub where it may be like you have a UCSD nearby that's turning out excellent graduates and there's kind of a ready workforce there, you do have the collaboration of people wanting to talk with like-minded people or people who are in the area. Certainly climate, all those other things matter. But at the same time, you know, we're looking at firms going out of state. And like you say, we're seeing an increasing trend of just going out of country. I mean, you know, in my district, Governor Perry gets all this publicity for coming to visit every one of the companies in my district. But it's not just him. I mean, he kind of gets the most publicity, but it's really a ton of governors and foreign leaders, all this, that are relentlessly kind of going after these companies and these jobs. And I get why. They're great companies, great jobs. And so I think the challenge for us is, how do we keep all those great companies, great jobs that are providing, of all things, providing a tremendous benefit to the health of our state and our country here? What can be done to do that? There's some things that we as a state can't do, the FDA, some things we can't have impact on or maybe have a limited impact, but there's some things that we can. And so I think for me, and my guess is my colleagues on this committee, I think we need to be kept apprised as to what can be done to make sure that we're doing everything that we can, that you all continue to grow.
I think from that perspective, people have for years been kind of singing the death knell of Californian industry, saying, oh, taxes are too high, regulation is too onerous, but still these types of industries stay in California. And I think California has a lot of natural advantages that offset some of those other issues, like higher education, like climate. People just like to live here. But I do think it's worth thinking about, how do we make sure that some of those disadvantages don't get too onerous? I mean, there is a natural advantage, and it's fine to take, to kind of make hay out of that. And you can have slightly higher taxes and slightly more onerous regulation. But there's a limit to which we should raise those levels, I guess.
No question. There is a tipping point, right? There's a tipping point at where the weather, the climate in San Diego, I mean, I don't know why somebody would want to leave to go to Texas, right? From San Diego. So, so the point being there is, the tipping point had to get fairly significant, that somebody would say Texas is a better option for me than San Diego. That's my opinion. But so what we're going to, I think, have to be tasked with here at some point is, how do we make sure that that's not happening, and furthermore from there, so not only are they not leaving, but they're expanding. Their ability for them to create more and more jobs is greater.
And that is the central focus of this committee, so I appreciate you bringing that up. And you'll see that competition on display at the BioConference just this year, that global competition that's underway. Assemblywoman Harkey.
Thank you. I'm going to be just brief, but going off on Assemblymember Mansheim's statements or questions. 6 years ago, when I started here, I've been on the Biotech committee for 6 years. The issues that we faced were land and facilities, the cost of land and facilities to expand, water, power. These are things I think that we can do something about in state. Now, the FDA and the sequester is DC. We can all complain about that, but that's got a president and a Congress and the Senate. They've both done this. So I understand, but I do read here that one of the problems with the sequester is the cap of the NIH grants, and so Scripps is having to pick up its more of the salary because California is a very expensive place to live. So I think the advantage of Texas is that people can earn $100,000, $200,000 or less and still have a nice house, have a good education system and other things. And in California, it's very, very expensive, and it's very expensive for companies. So I'm wondering about more R&D credits, more. We had like a redevelopment program that attracted certain things. Can we do something like that on a property tax break somehow?
I think those types of things are always going to help bring additional investment in research and high-paying jobs in the research field into California.
If we can keep people, I mean, if we can attract the talent. I know attracting the talent once you get beyond the research is a problem because you can do it cheap. You can live cheaper with a PhD or whatever and work for a company in another state. But I do think we do have a ready market here. People want their kids to stay, and I know that these were the issues, was land and facilities, water and power. Huge, huge issues for expansion. And then, of course, the ability to get the R&D credits.
And I do want to quickly call attention to policies that help promote access to these new medicines, as Mr. Lakdawalla mentioned. I mean, this is critical. And I can tell you, being out there with healthcare providers in this state every day, that the recent legislation passed by this assembly limiting the out-of-pocket exposure for cancer patients, for patients who are hit unexpectedly with this devastating disease, and making sure that they don't face an unreasonable out-of-pocket burden to get access to their medications, that helps promote a healthy market and climate for the innovative medicines that come to market, and ultimately creates a climate where people are willing to invest.
Yeah, my concern, I understand where you're going with that, but you can still sell into California.
Right.
We're trying to grow in California, so that idea is great as it is, but I don't think it helps us grow or keep or retain businesses or go into the clean manufacturing that this provides. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Final question for this round, Assemblyman Wilk.
First of all, I just have to weigh in that the fastest growing life science area in the state is in the 38th Assembly District. So I'll be going to Mr. Mainshine's event a little bit later, and I'll let him know that. And I had another hearing, so I'm kind of bouncing back and forth. So here's what I struggle with. So I've got a constituent, started a medical device company, sold it to one of the majors for $3 billion. Now he's doing another one. He's doing his clinical trials in New Zealand. Is looking very promising. And he's going to be taking it to Austin, Texas, because of taxes. I mean, so what can we do? You can't do anything. I can give you guys 13.3%, and you guys are going to spend on whatever you want. Or I don't need the money, and I can take that 13.3% and do good with it on how I think it's going to do good. So have that, and then Mrs. Harkey and I did a tour of a life science firm last fall, and the CEO of that company, he was making the argument of comparative advantage, saying, "Yeah, we're going to do R&D here, but we're not going to manufacture here. We're going to manufacture somewhere else." So, is biotech manufacturing dead in this state? Is there any way to save it, or do we have to realize that's gone? And what can we do to, as Mr. Mainshine was saying, value added or enhance the process so we can keep the R&D? I think for a large extent, we're going to keep the R&D because of weather and climate, and because, as you mentioned, Doctor, just the fantastic universities we have in this state. So I guess, one, is manufacturing dead? And then two, some things that we can do here at this level that would help foster a better environment for R&D to make sure that we hold on to what we have and hopefully grow it.
Yeah, and on the manufacturing point, I have to be honest, we don't do any significant manufacturing in California, so I'm really not in a position to comment on the sort of decision making that went into that. But I will say, I think you pose an interesting question about whether there should be exclusively a focus on trying to bring manufacturing in, or whether perhaps these higher paying jobs in some of the in the science fields are even more valuable than some of those manufacturing jobs. And I don't mean to suggest that
Well, they're all
more.
valuable
Yes,
though. I
yes,
mean,
yes.
and even those manufacturing jobs, they pay 75, 80 a year, whereas our average is 56,000. So it's above the average.
Yeah.
And that is a good segue, actually, to our next panel, which will be focusing solely on manufacturing. So let me thank our two panelists very much for your presentation today. And I want to thank everybody for their patience. We are going to be bleeding into the noon hour, but this is our final panel on manufacturing. And I'm pleased to introduce Dr. June Lee. Dr. Lee is the Director of Early Translational Research at the Clinical and Translational Science Institute and a professor in the Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine in the Department of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. Dr. Lee also serves as chair of the Drug Device Discovery and Development, the 4D work group at the UC Biomedical Research Acceleration, Integration, and Development Consortium. We will then hear from Mr. Vince Anicetti, who is Executive Director of Quality at Boehringer Ingelheim in Fremont in the Bay Area, I believe in Mr. Wachowski's area. He is also an adjunct professor with the Keck Graduate Institute of Applied Life Sciences, teaching in the area of biopharmaceutical quality. Today, Dr. Lee and Mr. Anicetti will speak on the topic of biotechnology manufacturing. They will share their insights on the current state of manufacturing within the state and what legislative action, as Assemblyman Wilk was referring to, is necessary to induce more manufacturers to come and stay in California. Thank you both for being here. And Dr. Lee, we will start with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the Select Committee on Biotechnology for this opportunity to speak today before you on this very important issue of biotech manufacturing and the role of academia. In my current role as the Director of Early Translational Research at UCSF, I am responsible for enabling and supporting early translational research at UCSF. And prior to this current role, I worked in drug development at Genentech, and was on faculty at UCSF prior to that as an academic researcher. I'll be speaking today from the perspective of a research administrator of a top academic institution whose day job is focused on infrastructural as well as programmatic needs for enabling and supporting important translational work that eventually leads to successful products that require manufacturing. Before I start making my comments, I want to just briefly introduce UCSF. UCSF is widely regarded as one of the world's leading universities in biological and health sciences, and it's by many recognized as birthplace of biotech industry. And our mission is to advance health worldwide through innovative health science, education, discovery, and patient care. We have 4 graduate schools: School of Medicine, School of Pharmacy, School of Nursing, and School of Dentistry. And we have a research enterprise with over $1 billion in research funding as of 2012, or the year 2012. And UCSF has been a major source of both technologies and talent for the biotech industry, both locally and really worldwide. And biotechnology industry, as you know, is an industry that's had its birth in South San Francisco and San Francisco Bay Area. And as many before in prior panels have mentioned, the start of biotech industry came from the groundbreaking science from the academic institutions that we house in California. The biotech manufacturing soon followed, and I'd argue that for biotech manufacturing industry to continue to thrive, successful development of new products need to continue to happen. And in order for successful development of new products, and we talked about earlier how difficult that can be, we need to have a healthy and robust R&D pipeline. Successful translation of academic discovery research is crucial to maintaining that healthy pipeline, and as you'll hear, with the evolving role of academia in that R&D, it's becoming even more increasingly so, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So my comments today will focus on 3 issues: the challenges in new biotech product development, the evolving role of academia in this process and what we at UCSF and other UC campuses are trying to do, and then what we think the remaining gaps are. So if you, the handout that I put together on the second page, I just want to share some staggering numbers and statistics that I think you may all have, that has already been alluded to earlier, but I wanted to just share those numbers with you. So we talked about the fact that drug development is lengthy, risky, and costly, and we can see here really just how lengthy and how risky and how costly that is. So for each 5 to 10,000 compounds that are discovered, 5 progress to clinical trials and 1 is approved. Those are pretty staggering statistics. And the development process, once a compound goes into development, takes between 10 and 15 years, and that is a pretty conservative estimate. And each FDA-approved drug can cost over $1 million, and the more recent, $1 billion. $1 million would be a bargain, yes. But the recent statistics suggest that depending on who you are and what company you belong to, that number can be several-fold billion. So, you know, those are pretty staggering numbers. And on top of that, if you look at the next page, R&D efficiency has been declining, and Ms. Coates talked about that a little bit earlier. By all accounts, while the total number of compounds entering the pipeline remains relatively stable, and if you look at that, that's the NDA, so new drug applications, remaining stable over the time that the survey was done. And the total number of drugs being approved also remains relatively steady, so that's NME, so new molecular entity on that sheet. The cost associated with this R&D effort has been increasing pretty rapidly over the last 2 decades. The factors that contribute to this increasing inefficiency are many and include rising costs of clinical trials, increased regulatory barriers and burdens, and a number of other more complex factors. And as a response to this inefficiency, some of the industry is, as Ms. Coates also mentioned, is starting to redirect some of their R&D efforts into private-public partnerships. And that means closer ties with academia and the discovery research that's going on in academic institutions. So the next sheet is actually kind of an interesting graphic. So looking at the U.S., if you look at between 1995 and 2007, which is the survey period for the figure that I shared with you, a little over 200 drugs were approved during that time period. More than about half came from the U.S., and the rest came from the other parts of the world. And of the half or so that came from the United States, about 65 to 70% had academic origins. That's pretty spectacular, actually. And what's also interesting is those technologies that had academic origins, a great majority, so about 64 out of 72, I think, stayed in the region. So when people talk about the world becoming flat in the world of manufacturing, and when people talk about world becoming flat in the world of software, I contend that in the complex development world of biotech, that may not be true, and that physical connectedness matters, and location matters, and co-location really matters. So, you know, by inference, I'd say, in order for us to continue to have a growing and vibrant biotech manufacturing economy in California, we need a healthy, robust, and cutting-edge research and discovery pipeline. So what is the opportunity here to create a better, healthier, more robust R&D pipeline in California? And to do that, I want to first talk about where the most significant gaps are today. So the next sheet shows you sort of where the process of development, R&D. So there is the discovery research on the far left hand. And basic science research is largely done, as you all know, in academic institutions and traditionally supported by public funding, although that source of funding we know is also somewhat jeopardized. The clinical development work is quite costly and requires regulatory considerations and compliance, and largely done by industry. The step in between, which is what we refer to as translational research, it's many different steps between discovery until clinical development is entered, is funded by a mix of government and private funding. This has traditionally been underfunded, and in the recent years, with decreased government and private investments in this space, the gap continues to grow. So, you know, this is the space that they call Valley of Death, and it's called Valley of Death for a lot of different reasons. A lot of people think about this as being the Valley of Death because there's not enough funding, and that's certainly part of it, but that's not really all of it. It's the Valley of Death because well, over the last 5 to 10 years, it's actually that the funding for this particular stage of development has gotten worse, and so the Valley of Death has taken on a new meaning. But really, what it's really created is a scenario where an academic researcher who's really adept and skilled at doing the basic science research is now being asked to take their research further down the translational pipeline before it can be considered for private investments. So now it's a Valley of Death because there isn't a lot of funding to do that, but there's also lack of translational research capabilities in academic institutions to really do that successfully. So there aren't necessarily mechanisms by which adequate assessment is done to see which projects are most worthy of that translational work, because that starts to become resource intensive. And there's also, translational research is by nature team science. Some team members don't exist in academic institutions. So really, once you decide this is a really great project to move forward because it has product potential, all the team players you need there to get to the lead molecule, to do the toxicology study, they're not always within arm's reach within academic institutions. So, you know, there's both the funding gap and the knowledge and product development gap and experience and knowledge that we need to address. So, University of California issued a report on the Working Group of Technology Transfer in October of 2012, and they reiterated just these 2 points. One is that the current funding and investment climate creates challenges in translating early stage inventions generated by university researchers into commercially valuable products and services. Investments beyond the scope of federal and other traditional research funding agencies are needed to mature technologies and create sustainable business to exploit them to create public benefit and economic value. So that was, again, reiterated that the gap is growing, funding is shrinking. So really, the real financial gap there to actually move programs along in a meaningful way is greater than it ever was before. But they also highlighted that campuses should considering local advisory boards of experienced faculty, alumni, and business leaders who can help educate and mentor faculty. So bringing in the product development knowledge and experience from the world around us was also highlighted as an important component of how we manage this process. And we are we could not be in a better place to do that well, Bay Area and California at large. So I'm going to highlight to you a couple of things we're doing at UCSF and things that we're doing at the University of California level that address some of these gaps, and then maybe end with highlighting what we think the remaining gaps are. So QE3, it was an institute that was started in 2000 as a mandate by Governor Gray Davis to support basic research in quantitative biosciences. It was to ensure that work is commercialized as quickly as possible. Work coming from the 3 UC campuses, UCSF, UC Berkeley, and UC Santa Cruz, and currently houses a number of really great programs and initiatives to facilitate entrepreneurship and business formation. They have a company in a box program where they provide legal services and financial services, as well as coaching on pitches and SBIR workshops to facilitate technologies that are ready to
SBIR.
small business innovation
Wow,
research
the
grant.
audience is answering. This is
Yes.
I guess I should know that already.
Thank you for the help. They also have a garage, which is basically incubator space that allows small, newly incorporated entities to get started creating a business. And they also have created small Mission Bay Capital, which is a very small seed funding venture that allows them to invest in some of these early stage technologies that come out of these universities. And then we have other programs like Center for Bioentrepreneurship. We've just become the launch program for NSF I-Core, which is training in the biotech space, which is training training students on how to become bioentrepreneurs. And then we have another program that is gaining a lot of momentum and it's a really terrific return on investment so far called the Catalyst Awards program at UCSF. And this really addresses the second gap that we talked about, the product development capabilities and the industry knowledge that we need to actually move the right programs forward in the right way in the translational space. So it's a program that's designed to help early translational research ideas in a number of different tracks, therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, and digital health into marketable products. And we do this in a very unique way. We leverage a network of about 150 consultants that we have who represent various areas of various disciplines of expertise, from IP to financing to toxicology to medchem to regulatory, and we leverage them to really create a virtual incubator space around technologies that we think have product potential. This has been really an amazing effort, actually, and it was launched in 2010. It's a program that has really been seen as a model program in terms of being able to return on investment, but also it's a program. You know, they say the biggest flattery is yes. So there are a number of other academic institutions and other non-academic institutions who are working on recreating what we've created here. So this program has also led to some new private-public partnership, one of which was just announced yesterday with MedImmune, another one that was announced maybe about a month or so ago with Quest Diagnostics. And again, I think the theme here is bringing and interdigitating the product development knowledge that we have in the industry closer together to the really exciting and product potential science that's going on in the academic institutions. So beyond UCSF, what are we doing? A lot of what we're doing at UCSF and what's going on at UC San Diego and the exciting things going on at Davis, we're saying we need to pull it all together. We have an organization called UC Braid, which is the 5 UC healthcare campuses that have come together. That's UCLA, UC San Diego, UC Irvine, UC Davis, and UC San Francisco. Braid stands for Biomedical Research Acceleration, Integration, and Development. I chair the Drug Device Discovery and Development Working Group. Within that, we're really focused on the early translation of academic discovery research into valuable and impactful therapies, but at the 5 campus level, because each campus has such different strength. We're really working on leveraging those 5 campuses, and we believe that the key and the most impactful programs at each of the campuses, we're working on trying to scale that out to the other campuses. And we think that there are great opportunities there. And we have lots of, so I would say one other thing. The one of the more visible output from the UC campuses coming together is our recent funding Center for Accelerated Innovation from NHLBI, so National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute, started a new grant mechanism where they're really trying to do exactly what we're trying to do in the Catalyst program, moving the most promising technologies forward towards product. And it was a $32 million funding established to establish 3 inaugural centers. UC Braid is one of the 3 inaugural centers, which is really exciting. They're asking us to really engage and interdigitate with the industry know-how to move the right projects forward. That's what we're doing. What are the remaining gaps? I mean, really, the fuel there, when we have all of the other pieces sort of lined up to support the right projects in the right way, the fuel there is funding. Academia, so NHLBI funding is significant in that NIH for the first time is really starting to move a little more distal in the kind of funding they're willing to provide. And industry is starting to move more proximal to say, we're going to start funding, we want to do more public partnerships and fund some of the earlier stage work that's going on, but there's still a significant gap. So that is essential to move some of these programs forward. So my concluding remarks, I'd say sustaining and growing a vibrant manufacturing industry requires robust research and successful development of new products in the region. And academic research plays and will continue to play a crucial role in breakthrough science that leads to new products. And gaps in translating discovery research to a product include funding as well as product development experience and expertise in academic institutions. And we in California are well poised to do that extremely well, perhaps better than anyone else in the country or really in the world. And so an investment in translation of discoveries at our top academic institutions can really can enable full potential of these discoveries to becoming a manufactured product that can impact both health and enhance California's economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for your presentation. Our final panelist of the day is Mr. Vin Sanicetti, Executive Director of Quality at Boehringer Ingelheim in Fremont. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thanks for the opportunity to speak and also staying through your lunch hour. I appreciate that very much. I will start with a little bit of introduction with Boehringer Ingelheim because we're new to manufacturing in California. BI is a privately owned pharmaceutical company. It's a global company of about 50,000 employees. We manufacture branded medicines, also generics, animal healthcare products, biologics, and biosimilars. The biologics, biotech products, and biosimilars are the 2 types of products that we produce in our Fremont, California facility where I work. Before joining BI, I was with Genentech for 30 years and grew up with the biotech industry as a native Californian and held a variety of leadership roles there. And over the last decade of my career, I spent a lot of time with teams that were looking at moving manufacturing operations out of the state. In one instance, it was to Oregon, and another one, it was to Singapore. There were good business reasons for doing that at the end of the day, but again, as a Californian, it was disappointing and something that I would really like to see us reverse the tide on. And joining BI in Fremont was exciting to me because I'm very excited and passionate about bringing manufacturing back and reinvigorating manufacturing in the state, and in particular the Bay Area. There's a lot of advantages to manufacturing in California, and BI chose to locate in the Bay Area so that we're part of the West Coast biotech community. The Bay Area, Orange County, San Diego, all of our innovation hubs. As we've heard a few times today, there's a lot of value in proximity. Discoverers, developers, and manufacturers, especially when we're building new technologies, have the opportunity to collaborate in a way that you really can't when your manufacturing operations are overseas. And one point I want to make is that manufacturing technologies aren't static. They innovate as well as things in the laboratory do. So In our Fremont facility, we're moving now to disposables technologies as a way to manufacture proteins rather than the big stainless steel tanks that I'm sure you're familiar with in many types of pictures. There's still a place for those large stainless steel types of facilities when you're making very high volume, big population products. But many types of products are going to lend themselves well to these disposable technologies, which is essentially making cell culture processes in plastic bags, recovering those proteins in plastic systems so that there's no cleaning, no changeover, and very importantly, there isn't this huge upfront investment, $200 million to $1 billion for a typical large plant like the one you would see in Vacaville on the way up here from the Bay Area. So there is a lot of innovation in manufacturing, and I think that's something that our state can really lead and seize on, and that's something we're trying to do in our Fremont facility. Biotech manufacturing jobs are very desirable jobs. They're well-paying. We heard that earlier today. They're very often, for employees, the first step in the door to move into other types of jobs within the company. I'm kind of a poster child for a career that was built on an evolving company and an evolving technology. So I think it's very healthy for our entire economy and population. I think it gives students below the PhD level jobs that they can move into and then grow up and give our economy a broader base. In a typical manufacturing operation, and we've done this internally in a number of assessments, probably for every PhD that's employed in quality or manufacturing, there's 10 to 12 employees who are at the bachelor's degree level or even non-degreed. I mean, we have cleaning personnel and security staff and those kind of things. So manufacturing, I think, gives a very broad base to communities in terms of job types and jobs for graduates at kind of every level of the degree ladder. So as I kind of look at the future, and I've thought about my experiences where I was part of teams that looked at whether or not do we stay in California, do we move out of California, and some of my most recent responsibilities were for manufacturing facilities all over the world. So I can kind of directly compare operations in one geography to another. We can compete with anyone in terms of the talent pool, the types of graduates we have, the proximity to talent because of the critical mass that we have in terms of the biotech community here. Obviously, great weather, great culture. The difficulties here in California around cost. It's really that straightforward. So the cost of living is obviously very high, housing, salaries, transportation, and taxes. So those are the kinds of things that we can focus on, I think, from the state side that would be very beneficial in terms of reinvigorating our manufacturing here in the state. The recent sales tax credit that was passed for investment in manufacturing equipment, very important. So we're putting in new fill and finish so we can fill vials and syringes in our facility, and those tax credits were a big factor for us in terms of being able to make those kinds of investments. And so, again, back to this theme of continuous innovation and evolution of technologies, incentives that help us that way, really important, I think really important for folks on your side of the room here to think about. So the question earlier in the day was, is manufacturing dead? And it's not, but it's dying. And I think it's really important that we kind of focus on what is the competition doing, whether that's Texas or Oregon, or it's Ireland or Singapore, and think about what we can do to compete, because it's a global economy, and we do need to compete with those other geographies to hang on to our technology, because I think we have a lot going for us, and we have a lead in many of these areas. We continue to innovate both in the academic community. Our startup and entrepreneurial community is amazing. And one of the things that we do by bringing manufacturing and contract manufacturing, something we also do in Fremont, is we enable that whole startup community. So most of the startups, I think in the Bay Area there's 200 to 300 of them, could never conceive of the $200 million or $800 million to build a plant. But they can come to us in Fremont, meet us face to face. We can learn about their product. We can transfer their technology. We can manufacture it for them. So manufacturing is an enabler to the research and the discovery community that we have in California that's frankly given birth to biotechnology. So it's a critical success factor for us and something we really need to fight for. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions I can answer.
Essentially, you're helping incubate some of those ideas, given that you're an established player. Some of the entrepreneurial activities and co-location and so forth, you can accommodate some of that.
Absolutely. So about half of our facility is reserved for contract manufacturing. So if there's a startup that has produced a protein or a molecule that they'd like to manufacture to do clinical trials, we can do that for them. And we can do that according to all of the regulations, to the right quality levels. And it saves those folks having to travel to Asia, Europe. So the proximity is a huge factor. We can have a true collaboration. It's something that just in our limited time in the Bay Area, about 2 years now, we've gone from an empty facility to a fully booked facility. So it's, again, a great competitive advantage for us as an overall community.
Right. So the sales and use tax exemption for manufacturing and biotech equipment included in the governor's budget. It was a partial. I was advocating for a full. Didn't happen, but it's a partial. Is that enough to move the needle when you're talking about the other cost challenges? I mean, it's, if you've got that scale, that's a few coins on that scale, but is it enough to actually make a difference in the competitive marketplace when you're looking at location?
Yeah.
And what do we need? What are the next steps that we ought to be evaluating? And I know there are conversations around the R&D tax credit, which is undersubscribed in some cases. I think we need to take on a reform of that, but also look at an expansion, but also a reform of how it's administered. A conversation for another day, but just on the tax incentive piece and how that gets factored in.
Yeah, thanks. Those are great questions, and I'm not a tax expert, but I would say a couple of things. So the tax credit for manufacturing equipment, partial tax credit, was a step in the right direction. It helps with that innovation and refurbishing. It would be very helpful if it was greater. So if that's something you can stay at, that would be very good. The other comment would be that credits for research and development will be very helpful to us in the manufacturing arena if we define development and research relatively broadly. So it includes things like improving technologies, for example, investing in disposable systems, which we do think is development. That's development of manufacturing processes. It's building efficiency in. So having credits for doing development work, even though it's not in the pure discovery lab, if we define that broadly, that's a huge incentive to investing in manufacturing and improved manufacturing technologies here in the state. Yeah.
And then, Dr. Lee, you were emphasizing the Valley of Death concern. So what can we do as state policymakers? And I know that there are a couple of states that you've cited that have that are putting money on the table on the state side to deal with the Valley of Death issue. Can you just touch on that and give us a recommendation for what we could do to address that specific concern?
So the two states that I highlighted in my handout were Utah and Michigan, but there's certainly examples of other states that are providing these similar kinds of funding to address what's commonly referred to as Valley of Death. So Michigan has the MTRAC program that that looks to identify the most compelling technologies in academic institutions and funding them through the translational research process. USTAR, similar in Utah, and that was a pretty big commitment by the state with partnering with University of Utah to identify the most compelling technologies to move forward. Maryland has a similar sort of program. Texas is creating a similar program. So I think there are plenty of examples where states have also acknowledged this big gap and the importance of really addressing the gap in order to continue to leverage the technologies that are in those academic institutions.
Very good. Well, thank you both. I'll turn to my colleagues if there are any remaining questions or comments before we conclude. Mr. Wachowski.
I guess when I think of the manufacturing sales tax, it's always great if you're growing. But if you're just existing and you're not going to buy any new equipment, doesn't really help you out. The idea on your disposable technology, I assume that this is can be copied by other manufacturing units in California and then outside of California. And then hopefully that's valuable for the small entrepreneurs, because I was just, if they're not coming to you to say, mix me up a batch of whatever it is, where are they going other than the university? I mean, is there some other shop in town, or they build their own? So is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. So there's global competition for contract manufacturing, and I would say we are clearly one of the leaders in terms of using disposable technology, but it'll go through a life cycle where it becomes established, and then other folks copy that and try to become competitive. So I do think the recipe here in California has to be built around innovation. I just think that's a key success factor. But we need to think about needing to innovate in manufacturing and trying to hold on to our ability to manufacture, as well as we do in drug discovery. So we'll go through waves of employing new technologies, so to speak. And I think offering incentives for investing in that and building that is extremely helpful. I think once technologies are established, incentives to train workforces, very, very helpful. We've used some of the programs here in California for that previously, as well as programs to collaborate with universities and get some credits for that, is also something that we've taken advantage of.
So you guys always talk about these ecosystems, and on this concept of proximity, right? Because I mean, New Zealand is not approximate to anything. I mean, that's a trip if you're leaving academia with the pure science and you've done your on that line. So for the manufacturing portion, I mean, I think probably maybe there's some people in San Francisco that think Fremont's a cross-country journey, but it's actually in between Stanford and Cal if you count the Bay. So where are the opportunities in other parts of the state for manufacturing because of the cost of land, the cost of resources that are proximate? I'm thinking of like Merced, or in the Central Valley is starving for anything. And with the idea that they have a UC out there, but there's probably an infant research arm of it. But is Cal and UCSF and Stanford and the R&D stuff that's going on in the Bay Area, is there some approximate home for manufacturing where the price points, when you go through your analysis and you're looking at different parts of the world, is there something we can do for other parts that maybe the cost of living is cheaper in that area versus Fremont or Burlingame? What is proximate, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting idea, and I think there's a lot of possibilities there. So I think the most important consideration is always, does the person's or the company's product fit into your facility? And there's some things that are just volume driven or technology driven. But if all things are equal, proximity and cost tend to be drivers. Proximity can mean the same time zone, because if we just have the 8 hours where we're both working, that's a huge advantage versus a facility that's in Asia where we might have no hours that overlap. And back to the disposables technology, biotech plants for doing cell culture protein production are becoming much more modular. So we actually have a concept of a plant in a box. Essentially now with these disposable technologies, you can almost use modular units that look like mobile homes, but inside is the capabilities of doing manufacturing. So I think there's a future here where you can see these things move to different parts of the state and built pretty easily. You just need that critical mass in that location of talent, opportunity, and incentive, so it works out. I think that's a really interesting idea.
Very good. We want to offer an opportunity for members of the public to comment. Lots of folks from industry, but seeing no public comment, I want to thank my colleagues for attending. I want to thank our two panelists in front of me and the other panelists from our previous panels. I want to thank you all for attending. We're concluding the hearing. Just a couple of notes about just some of the themes that I heard emphasized today, and these will all be explored more in depth at a future date. The continued need for grant money, research, investment, threats via sequestration, NIH grants, early stage grants by the state or industry, continued investments in K-12, better engaging our first and second year higher ed students, and the role of active learning, successes in cancer treatment that are highlighted, of course, the health benefits of that, but also utilization globally as California positions itself in the market. Emphasis on challenges with bringing drugs to market, impacts on pricing, the role of venture capital, the Valley of Death, which we explored, continued strengths in groundbreaking science, which is the core of this innovative industry, and also the need for partnership and or collaboration among academia and industry, and a constructive role for public policy. So we will be exploring all of that in future hearings. So thank you all for attending today. This concludes the Select Committee on Biotechnology's informational hearing, our first of 2014. Thank you all for being here.